Max, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you. You've had some of the greats here, and I'm honored to be a part of it.
And I see you have great taste in mics as we both sit here with our RE20s.
Love my RE20.
Let's do the state of where things are at for you today. Let's kind of set the stage for everybody so they know who you are, and then we'll go back and dig into the past. But where are you talking to us from, and what is this lovely studio you're in? And give us the basics.
Start with the name, I guess. I'm Max Deering. I own and operate Darkpine Studios here in the thriving metropolis of Graham, North Carolina. We're pretty much right smack dab in the center of the state, east to west, north to south. Find a map, throw a pin at the center of the state, and you're probably pretty close to where we are.
And your studio, is it located at your home?
Yes, it's on my home property. I didn't ever want to get into a situation where seasonal ups and downs would cause me to lose the studio. So it's on my property, and it makes it a tough commute to get to work, but it's really not bad having a studio on your property.
I would agree 100%. And we'll get into the building of it and such, but let's get into the past. Where did you grow up?
Originally from Louisville, Kentucky. Grew up there, got my degree in electronics engineering, worked for GE Medical Systems up in Milwaukee. Got tired of, having a white Christmas and a white Easter, and said, I need to get back down south, and ended up coming down here to the Carolinas and fell in love with North Carolina and have been here ever since and ain't going anywhere else. Absolutely love it here. We have all 12 seasons.
Why Graham? What is it about that place that drew you to there as opposed to, say, Asheville or somewhere else?
Well, a number of reasons. The biggest one is, of all the places I've been to Memphis, been to Nashville, been to New Orleans, of course, Milwaukee, and been to Chicago, been to Indianapolis and Cincinnati, Louisville. There's great talent everywhere. But to be honest with you, there's more God-given talent in Alamance County than anywhere else I've ever seen. I swear it's the water. It's got to be. It's something like that gets these kids interested in music. And, there's everything here. There's punk, funk, soul, rock, country, bluegrass, newgrass, blues, rap, R&B, new school and old school R&B. There's a blend that occurs with all the different musicians. A friend of mine says, it's kind of incestuous because you've got, 12 drummers and they play in 24 different bands.
Right. As drummers do.
Yeah. Guilty. It's just a wonderful blend of personalities and styles. I've never seen anything like it. That, and the property taxes here are really good, and property's fairly reasonable still. Yeah. So, it kind of all came together and found the property and built it here.
Do you think the immense amount of talent, is that by some chance related to the school system and the music programs there in the school system?
To a degree. There are good schools in the area, but so many of them, they started playing when they were 3, 4, 5 years old. And the schools that are close to us, mainly the universities, we've got Elon and GTCC. They have some excellent programs. Yet there's all of this talent that's happening well before you get to even middle school and high school. These kids, like I said, it's got to be the water. That, and I think, we are a rural area. So there's not a lot for kids to do. There's just something magical, something special here. It's kind of hard to explain.
Tell me about the role of music or technology, or how did that find its way into your world?
Well, according to my mother, I was playing drums in the womb. She swore that I was playing paradiddles on her kidneys. I've been playing music since I was old enough and tall enough to reach in the cabinets in the kitchen and pull out pots and pans and just wailed on them. And played all through high school and into college, and got an interest in eating and being able to pay rent. So I went to school and got my degree in electronics engineering technology, put off music for a long time. Like I said, I moved down here to North Carolina. I actually blamed the studio on my wife. I was a school photographer, and as a school photographer, you learn to play golf. And so we used to go play golf. We'd try to get in a quick round on Fridays, just kind of keep the chops up. We were out on a golf course in Durham, and we got hit by lightning. Yeah.
Really?
Yes, sir. As a result of the lightning, I lost a dear friend of mine. We were playing as a 3 and a 2, and we get these popcorn storms that pop up during the summer. And so we thought, okay, this is just going to blow through here real quick because, it was just sprinkling a little bit. And then the next thing I know, I'm waking up in the emergency room trying to figure out what's going on. And so it kind of did a number on me, physically and mentally and, physiologically, the whole thing. My wife got tired of me playing steering wheel drum kit. And at her encouragement, I started to play some music. Actually got to where we were pretty darn good, if I, say so myself. So we played a few benefits, and then we started playing a couple of shows. And we played one show at a Raleigh Shrine Club. Some guys said, hey, we'd love to have you come down and, play our Shrine Club. And there were 3 or 4 other Shrine Clubs there. And they were like, yeah, we'd love to have you guys because you guys are playing the music we like. And but we got to have a demo. Okay. So I looked into, us getting a demo. We considered ourselves to be old geezers. And, we were doing this for fun and part-time. And it was just too expensive for us to do it at the time. So I had a friend of mine said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll come out and we'll see if we can do a direct 2-track DAT. And I'm like, okay, that'd be great. And of course we were too loud, too small of a room, not treated, nothing. So that didn't work out too well. And so I got a Porter Studio 4. That didn't work out too well either because we were not a multi-track band and just trying to figure this stuff out, it wasn't too good. Glad those tapes aren't around anymore. And then they talked me into an ADAT. So I got an ADAT. We had, I want to say like a 8-channel Mackie or something like that, and that wasn't quite enough. So then I got another board. I think I got I think it was a 16-channel, and then I got a 24-channel, and it was on. So, I was hooked, and eventually got another ADAT, and then I got 2 more ADATs, and I got a new board, and started doing recording for other bands around, and it just kind of grew from there until the point where I was pretty much the only mobile recording studio in North Carolina. I had more work than I could handle. I was really focusing on the church market because it was just wonderful music and great people. Kind of based it off the model of what we did in school photography, which was, it was a fundraiser. I had quite a few churches that wanted to, that were booking me, and they were like, well, we want to do some overdubs. Can you, have you got a studio we can come to? And I'm like, no, sure don't. I can come back, but I got to charge, something for it. I thought, that's crazy. It's just overdubs. They just need to do, like a horns, a couple of horns, or maybe they want to add some choir vocals, some choir stuff, or add some percussion, just some sweetening kind of stuff. And I referred them to all the studios in the area. Unfortunately, it became obvious to me that my clients stopped calling me. This isn't good. Finally contacted one of the churches that I was very, very, disappointed that they didn't call me back. They said that they didn't call me because they had talked to the studio, and the studio said that they didn't want to do a mobile recording, that they wanted to record in the studio. And they were not happy with it because it wasn't as good as what they knew that they would have gotten had it been in the church itself, which was the whole concept of me talking to these churches, because, where else do you get more of the mojo, the muse? It happens when you're in a comfortable environment. That's, there's just something magical that happens. Yeah. And, sometimes you don't really get that in the studio, especially with a large group. And so I'm like, okay, now I got to build a studio. What was I thinking?
Oh my gosh.
Oh, yeah. So I was on a quest. I found this property.
And then the rest is history.
The rest is history.
Well, I want to ask you,
Sure.
and I'm sorry about the loss of your friend during this lightning strike, but I assume it was a life-altering event on many fronts.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Did the lightning strike have an effect on your decision-making in terms of music and recording?
I guess you could say that, yeah. The number of changes that occurred were pretty devastating for a good long while. Long-term memory loss, short-term memory loss. It just rewires the whole central nervous system, all kinds of issues. So getting in and playing music again is what really, really changed my attitude towards music. Within literally hours of playing, I physically felt better. I emotionally felt better. I thought my music days were over completely and totally, to be honest with you. I never thought I'd ever, sit down and play music again. But my wife is a classically trained pianist. And so she, I guess, intuitively recognized that, I needed some music in my life because, again, I was just, constantly playing steering wheel drum kit. And it was such a cathartic thing. It was such a physically demanding aspect that, your brain starts to rewire itself. And it's very healing. Science has shown that, children, when they learn music, do so much better in all aspects of their life, everything from mathematics, social skills, all that kind of good stuff. Well, it was kind of a rebirth for me in that respect. It made me feel like a real human being again. I can't thank her enough, and I can't forgive her for it either because, I got a studio.
Right.
I actually lost my mind and built a studio. It's allowed me to regain focus. I'm a little bit more outgoing, I guess, a little bit more tolerant of things. And, I definitely love to explore. I love the creative process. The lightning, it changed things for me in ways that I didn't really immediately recognize. And now that I look back some 30 years later, it definitely had an effect on me. When you go from not being able to walk 3 steps without pain and then take another 3 steps and then you've got pain somewhere else, you get pretty grumpy. I know that there's a lot of people that have been struck by lightning that, they have profound changes to their life. I did too, but not necessarily in a religious experience. It was kind of a hard-fought battle, just to kind of come back and be a normal human being, which drummers and normal human beings don't actually go together in the same sentence, but,
Fully agreed. Well, let's talk about, once you made the decision to build this studio, take us through the building process.
Oh, sure. The whole process, like I said, started out with me, saying, okay, I'm going to, I've got to build a studio. So I'm like, okay, let's do some research. You can't just go off and do this half-cocked. So I started working on a design because we hadn't bought this property yet, but I was working on a design and trying to educate myself and, okay, this is what I think would be, a good thing. And well, maybe not. So I got involved in recording.org, a couple of other sites where I could find information on acoustics and recording studios and the like. Kind of met up with some really good folks over at recording.org at that time. One of them being Rod Gervais. His book, Recording Studios, Build It Like the Pros. Rod was very patient with me. I learned that acoustics is not always what you think it is. Sometimes it's the exact opposite. Sometimes it's instead of 1 + 1, it should be 1 - 1 or 1 divided by 2, or just trying to getting back into the mathematics of it. With Rod's guidance, we then bought the property here. And so then I started working on, what I actually had here, which was the shell of the building. He gave me some guidance. It's rather interesting. in asking questions, I was like, well, there's got to be an optimal size of your thickness of your walls. The space between, if you're building room within a room, you've got each wall, and then you've got the stud base, and then you've got an air gap. And I'm like, somewhere along the line, there's got to be an optimal bang for the buck. In speaking with Rod, of course, this is all online, not actually in conversation. I'm like, it seems like it's going to be 16 inches from surface to surface, or inside surface to inside surface. And I guess it was the way that I worded it. And he said, no, it's 24 inches. Okay, well, scrap these plans, because, when you go from 16 to 24 inches, it changes everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I lost the shape of the control room, and a myriad of things all changed. And I got my drawings done. But before I go to the county and say, okay, I'm ready for my building permits, I called them and said, I'm wanting to build a recording studio. Do I have to have anything special? They said, well, for something like that, it's not a residential thing where you're just adding on to your house or anything like that. So yeah, we're going to need to have blueprints with engineering, seal of approval. Uh-oh. So I called all the architects in the area. I called, all the great studio designers and said, hey, look, you're used to seeing these kind of prints, would you? And they're like, sorry, we can't, because we didn't design it. We don't know for sure exactly what what your needs are, what your plans are. So no, sorry, we can't. It's understandable.
These were your plans though, originally, right?
They were my drawings. Yes.
Okay.
And I went up on the forum, and I'm like, hey, I can't find anybody that will, look at my blueprints and, give me an engineering approval. Anybody got any ideas? I think Rod probably sat there and went, okay, I'll have mercy on the kid. And so he said, yeah, all right, send them to me. Let me see what you got. And he sends me back this email. He's like, what the hell did you do? You're wasting a lot of space here. And I'm like, you told me to. He said, no, I didn't. I'm like, yes, you did. I sent him, the part of the thread that, he told me to go from 16 to 24 inches.
Right.
A couple of days, and he sent me a message back. He's like, sorry about that. Do you have your original blueprints? I'm like, well, sure. So I sent him my files. He swore me to secrecy. I cannot tell what he charged me, but what he did was absolutely stunning. Fixed all my problems, improved the design. Thank God he did. And I have since come to the realization, and I am now an advocate, and I preach this to anybody that I possibly can. DIY your build, but unless you're willing to risk a lot of heartache, get a professional to help you design the thing. If nothing else, consult with a professional, because there's so many little things that you can do to ruin your studio. You don't necessarily have to have a $30,000, architectural bill for, a little one-room studio, but at least consult with somebody who knows what they're doing, who does this on a daily basis, because they're going to keep you from doing a lot of stupid things that I was getting ready to do without the assistance of Rod. It would not have turned out this nice. I wouldn't have white hair. I would have no hair, because I'd have pulled it all out, trying to fix everything that I did wrong.
Is there anything in that list of things that you were doing wrong that you could articulate to us that would make sense?
Oh, sure. One of the biggest ones are your penetrations. Doors, walls, HVAC, especially your doors and windows. The details that you really need to look at when you're putting your window in a control room or a window anywhere in a studio. The common sense approach to putting seals on the windows, on the glass itself, just little things that you wouldn't think are that critical. If you're using multiple layers of gypsum, putting backer rod and caulk around around the perimeters. There's so many things, and they're all small, and that's where a professional designer will help you avoid the little mishaps. The truth is, wherever air goes, so goes sound. So if you've got a little, just even a little pinhole can cause you, huge heartaches. Caulking and puttying around all of your electrical inlets and outlets. Lighting is huge. HVAC is absolutely critical. Oh my gosh. High volume, slow air. Power is another one that's, power and grounding. Most electricians aren't really versed enough in the types of issues that we have with noise in studios, being able to convey that to your electrician. I was very fortunate that once I got the designs from Rod, I went to my county and they looked at the blueprints and they said, wow, these are amazing detailed drawings. How much do you think it's going to be? And I said, well,
I've been down this path.
I said, I think it's going to be about 35 to 40,000. She looked at me and she said, well, okay, you're at the upper limit, but I'm going to allow you to be an owner contractor. And so she gave me the list of all the things I had to do. So I had to have, a licensed concrete contractor, licensed plumber, and a licensed electrician and licensed HVAC. I think it's pretty obvious to say that it went a little over 40,000. And of course, this was, 15, 16 years ago now. But I did save a lot of money by DIYing the build itself.
Is it the case for you that what they end up charging you as a fee is based on the price? Is that how? Yeah, okay.
One of the things that just perplexes a lot of DIY guys is when you establish your budget, be careful, because it's going to cost you at least a minimum of twice as much as you think. And in most cases, it's 3 times what you think your budget is. So plan accordingly and get ready to hemorrhage a lot of cash. My proposal was 40. I think I came in just under 118 by the time I was done.
Where is it that people overlook what it's going to cost, and why is that such a common thing of thinking, okay, I'm going to spend 40?
Where'd that other 40 and 40 come from?
Yeah, no kidding.
Fasteners.
Yeah,
I had allotted, I think, $500, $1,000 tops for my fasteners. Screws, nails, brackets. I'll include caulk and glue and that kind of stuff. I had close to $5,000 just in screws.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I was like, what in the heck?
Oh,
this is insane. How did I spend that much money? Well, I had to put an addition on to the shell of the building that was here. So I hadn't really calculated all of that in quite accurately. Of course, when I started to build, and this is something that you don't think about, you're like, oh, well, it's only going to take me, 6 months to a year to build. In most economies, well, since I've been an adult, the value of the dollar keeps dropping down every year. So that means that the cost of goods goes up every year. If you get, a little spike in inflation, which we did when I was building, that accelerates. When I first poured the first bit of concrete for the lounge, it was $35 a cubic yard. And when I poured the sidewalks and the parking pad the next year, it was $125 a cubic yard and a $50 delivery fee minimum. Whoa. That was huge. That's what inflation was doing. 4x8 sheet of OSB was $19. And when I started and when I finished, it was $35 or $40 for an individual sheet. Of course, I was trying to buy, 25, 30 sheets at a time. So, I could get some bulk discount. But yeah, it's inflation just eats you up real quick, and you don't realize it I used to go to Wendy's and get a 99-cent junior bacon cheeseburger. It's now $2.99.
It's interesting on the building materials aspect. I was at Steve Albini's studio in Chicago doing a studio tour there with Greg Norman, who runs the studio now since Steve's passing.
Right.
And Greg was telling me that it was cheaper for them to haul in flatbed trucks full of adobe from New Mexico to build Studio A than it was to buy locally sourced masonry, bricks or cinder blocks.
Wow. That doesn't surprise me. It's amazing, some of the pricing that you can find out there or that you have to deal with out there. My HVAC, this is something where I kind of got myself in trouble too. When I built the studio, I had given Rod, my ceiling heights and, to the inside of the shell and all of that kind of good stuff. A lot of that was based upon, how much stuff was in here. Because I had actually cut lumber down on the property and had it all stickered up in here, drying out, air drying. So I was having to climb around all kinds of stuff to gain access to anything. I made a critical mistake in measurement. The front of the building, which is that way, was actually 8 inches higher than the end at this end of the building. My concrete contractor found it. And he's like, okay, what do you want to do? Well, you got a problem. You've got this slope. What do you want to do? And I'm like, well, what's going to be the easiest and what's going to be the best? And he's like, well, if we hold the rear of the building as our starting grade and we remove all of the soil in the building, you're going to have a flooding issue. Okay, so what's the resolution of that? He's like, well, we got to take about half your hill, got to take about a half acre of soil out of here.
Oh, and Max, tell me if I'm right on this. I don't know whether you're in California or North Carolina. It doesn't matter where you are. Taking soil away can get expensive, right?
Oh, yeah. It was going to cost probably close to another $15,000.
Oh my God!
And I'm like, oh, there goes all of my money for the rest of the build. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess that means we're going to hold the front as our starting point, and we'll just elevate up. And he said, okay, that's fine with me. Because one of the things that we did find when I was dragging the power down here, because I had to have a new transformer and they trenched all the power down here, was that this is evidently one of the finest rock farms in all of Alamance County. I mean, you can't drive a shovel into the dirt without finding big rocks. Well, I'm actually on one of the highest hills in the county, and I didn't realize that. You wouldn't think so, driving on a property. But I looked at a topo map, and yep, it's one of the higher hills in the county. It would have been probably more than $15,000 in 2009 dollars to be able to get that transition to be right. So yeah, moving dirt is expensive.
Depending on where you are, geographically speaking, and the composition of the soil, some soil that's clay-like, it's compacted, and when it comes out of the ground, it just kind of expands and opens up.
Yeah.
And then that costs more to haul and get out of there.
It's those little details that eat up your money. So you got to be careful. And where it ended up showing up was in my HVAC system, of all things. Okay, so how did 8 inches create a problem with the HVAC unit? Well, I've got a 10-foot tall wall, and there's a ceiling that's going to come down to it, and there was the existing building, and I was about 3 inches too short from being able to put the HVAC units where Rod had designed them to be. So now we got to move the HVAC units, which changes all of the ducts. So you get things that that will snowball and avalanche on you, and it added, I think it was close to $6,000 more.
And here's a tip for anybody watching, listening. If you want to have any kind of clue as to how these little anomalies, we'll call them, creep up, I tell you, you can watch any number of shows on HGTV, and I'll give you one in particular, that English show, Grand Design. It seems that these people have these grandiose ideas for these homes that they're going to build, and they set the budget, and then everything you're talking about that happens in a studio build happens to these people.
Yeah.
And, they run out of money, and projects got to get put on hold for 6 months to a year, and then the rain comes, and it's just like it really gets out of hand.
Oh, yeah, it's insane what'll happen. One of the things that I learned was to buy in bulk. Buy as much as you possibly can. I wasn't ready for it, but I knew to prepare. So I shopped around, and I found, I guess they're about the second or third largest distributor of Owens Corning products. I went in and I said, all right, I don't want to order it now, but this is what I'm looking for. I gave them the total square footage of, rigid that I was looking for, the total, square footage of pink fluffy that I was looking for. They said, well, you're going to be better off to go to Home Depot for your pink fluffy, or, Home Depot, Lowe's, or Maynard's, anywhere, but you don't want to get the pink fluffy from us because we have to charge so much more because it's not anything that we normally stock. I'm like, okay, but we can handle, all your mineral wool. We can handle, the 703. We can handle 706, 705. We can get all the Owens Corning products. We can handle tapes. We can, handle your caulk and, the fire caulk and all that kind of good stuff. And I'm like, okay. And so the guy calls me about 3 weeks later, and he says, I got a deal for you. At this time, Owens Corning has an end run on full 4x8 sheets of rigid 703. I can cut you a real deal if you'll take it. Well, hell yeah. I mean,
Let me think about that. Yes.
Yeah. And so, 3 days later, they got a truck dropping off all this Owens Corning 703. I don't know if anybody has ever seen a bundle of Owens Corning 703 4x8 sheets. There's 12 sheets to a bundle. So it's 12 inches thick by 4x8, 3 pounds per cubic foot. That's a big old block of mass that I had to move around. I shoved that damn 703 around here till I got tired of it. I mean, it went from the control room to the tracking room to the lounge to the tracking room into the hallway. So logistics becomes a huge issue that you have to be concerned with, which, that's one of the other tips that I try to tell folks is, get ready. You're going to be moving a bunch of stuff around all the time. I had lumber in here, because I watched the Woodwright shop one time too many, I guess. And I had some oak trees and a couple of walnut trees and the prettiest cedar tree on the property. Got taken out by an ice storm. So I had all of it milled into lumber. And so that lumber was, in here everywhere. I got a deal on this Jatoba here in the control room, and it's actually tongue and groove Jatoba flooring. So, it's still all I had to acclimate to the building. And so, I was milling the lumber up, and I had sawdust up to my butt, like 3 or 4 times in here, running it through the planer and the joiners, and and then you've got tools that you're going to have to move around. You got everything from boxes of fasteners and
tools you're going to have to buy too.
Oh yeah, and get ready. There was a fellow who built a spaceship of a studio in his garage. Paul Woodlock. He's a British guy. I'm like, boy, he went through like 9 drills and 3 or 4 saws. And I'm like, I won't go through anything like that. I went through 2 planers, 3 skill saws, 2 chop saws, and 2 table saws.
It's just that money is just adding up.
Oh, yeah. And, like I said, screws, you think, boxes of drywall screws. No, try, 2 kegs of drywall screws. And then, and that's just the regular drywall screws, and then if you're using 2 layers of drywall, whoa, now you got to get the longer screws. Well, those longer screws cost more, and it's the same number of sheets of drywall, just doubled. So I went through 2 kegs of, I think it was 1 inch or 1 1/4 inch, and I went through 2 kegs of 3 inch. And the 3 inch is not double the cost; it's like 2.5 times the cost. So that's where you start to and then the wood screws, and the nails. Oh my gosh!
Not to mention the gas to fill your car to make the multiple trips back and forth.
If you're going to build a full-size studio, I recommend that you get a truck. Get a good truck.
In retrospect, I don't know if you had the room on the property, but would it have made sense to build maybe like, a simple storage barn type thing first?
I had one.
Oh, just to put all the stuff in.
Oh, yeah. But there wasn't quite enough room for me to put a big barn in. I just had a small wood shop where I could, store stuff, and I, had, some lumber there. But, when you get 64 16-foot 2x10s, where are you going to put them? Where are you going to put 96 sheets of OSB? It's got to go in the building, because that's where it's going to be used. Logistics becomes an animal unto itself too.
Once you kind of overcome all the obstacles of building the studio, the decision-making process of what gear to buy, the workflow, the wiring, and you talk about unexpected costs of fasteners.
Oh, yeah.
The unexpected cost of wiring and mic stands and just infrastructure are the most unsexy things I've ever dealt with.
Oh, believe you me. Well, one of the things that I'm so thankful that Rod did was he had me put in patch panels with PVC that went under the slab. And we didn't do, your usual, 1 or 2 inch. We put in 3 inch. And if you're going to do that, put in sweeps. Do not put in 90s, put in sweeps. Because when you go to pull wire, you don't want to pull a 90. If you're pulling, 3 or 4 feet, it's not that bad. But, if you're pulling, 35, 40 feet of, wire through a 2 inch, and then you go, oh, I need to pull something else in there, that gets to be a nightmare. Oversize that PVC. Make your life future-proof your aggravation and reduce it as much as you possibly can by putting in as large of a PVC as you can. I'm so thankful to Rod for that advice and when he did the design here. I can, even though the studio is completely wired, if I need to add something, I don't have to worry about it. All I got to do is just pull the panel off, put my fish tape down, pull it right up, and it's going to come up with no problem at all. I can't thank him enough for the insight that he has into what it takes to build a studio, because he's saved me so much aggravation. Of course, I do have to blame him because he gave me plans that I could follow, and I actually built the place.
Yeah. How long did it take you from the idea to completion?
Ooh.
Or to first session, I should say.
Almost 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah, I just remembered the sand. And this kind of goes back to logistics as well and the design. Rod actually had me put in compacted sand underneath the slabs. I pounded sand for, I know, 3 weeks. And, of course, a lot of people can tell me to go pound sand now, and sorry. But that was kind of a running joke there, because I remember I had a pile of sand. Oh, gosh, it was almost as tall as I was. I want to say it was about 5 foot tall, 15 feet wide. And I went through 3 of those to get all the sand in here. When we started to excavate for the slab in the control room, I have bays in the back wall that I'm looking at. And so we had, 2 PVCs that went down. And the reason why we've got 2 is one for goes innas, one for goes outas. That was absolutely brilliant. And I encourage everybody, if you're going to do anything like that, keep those wires separate, get your goes innas and your goes outas, because if you're trying to pull all of them through the same pipe, it can be aggravating. If you're having, when we were having the conversation, when I was having the conversation with the electrician, and before we had the actual slabs in here done, we were like, because they're forming a V coming up to the front of the console. They're coming from the back of the wall up to the console, so it's a big V. And by the time you get up towards the front of the V, you got to excavate the whole thing. Why put in the channels? Because they're so close. You've got this much soil and in between all of these pieces, and it just crumbles. So we just excavated the whole thing. That proved to be an extra cost, because that soil being removed now has to be replaced by sand. And so like I said, I was pounding sand forever, it seemed like, because I was having to do it all by hand. So I, taking my wheelbarrow, filling it up, rolling it into the studio, dumping it, and dumping it, and dumping it, and dumping it, and then go get a compactor, and I'd run that over it, and it would all settle down. Oh boy, need some more sand. So lather, rinse, repeat, I can't tell you how many times, because we ended up needing 16 inches of compacted sand. That was supposed to be what was in the field, but because, the PVCs went down another, I'm going to say they went down another 6 or 8 inches. Oh my God. That's a lot of volume that I hadn't counted on. So, like I said, I think I spent 3 weeks with a vibrating, compactor, and just trying to get that sand as compacted as I possibly can, because the slab's going to depend upon it, so I can't mess around. I can't afford to have this slab crack. So, I've got to make sure that it's packed in there as tight as I can possibly get it.
Yeah.
And, so there was another, I'm not going to say it was a huge amount, probably $100 in $200 extra in sand, and at that point, I wasn't too worried about it, because I hadn't started to hemorrhage enough money to worry about it at that point.
Keeping your motivation up too, I think, is a factor, because
oh yeah,
you get tired and you're just like, oh my gosh, I just want to go lay down on the couch.
I'll tell you what, I slept on one night. I was so tired, I slept on the sand floor. I was just like, I'm done. I'm toast. I couldn't even walk up to the house, because I've been running that compactor for a couple of hours, and I'm just like, I'm just going to sit down here for a minute. And I woke up.
And that's, if you've ever used any kind of a jackhammer or chisel, like anything mechanical that does that vibration, that starts to really mess with you a little bit.
Oh yeah. Like I said, I'm at that point, I was still, very much still dealing with the effects of the lightning. I'm not necessarily proud to say it, but, I was in pain management for years, because, I'm constantly, having, cramps and all kinds of issues, and, something like the compactors, and, I had a jackhammer in here trying to jackhammer some of the rock out of here. It just wreaked havoc on my body. If it weren't for morphine, this building wouldn't have been built, because I had to, we kind of did a relay in pain management, didn't want me to get hooked on, this drug or this drug or this drug. So about every about every 3 months, we'd swap, medications around. I mean, sometimes it was just everything I could do just to even physically get up and come down here, much less get any work done. But, when you get to certain points, it's, you do find new motivation. I'm not going to paint it at all as doom and gloom, but, you hit certain milestones, like, you get your underslab inspection done and they say, yep, you can pour concrete. Oh, yes. One step completed. Saw service. Yay, I got saw service. I can actually do something, with a saw down here. I don't have to run extension cords from all the way down to the house. Saw services was a huge motivation for me. Getting the underslab was. Getting the concrete done was huge motivation. Because that meant that I could actually start my walls. Your framing inspection is another big motivator because it's just like, whew, I can now do something with the walls. It's going to start being a studio now. The plumbing inspection, the HVAC inspection, then it's the CEO, and that's when the real work begins. And I didn't realize that. Everybody's like, well, you got all the construction done. Now it's down to the fun part, and it's just like, no, no, this is where the real work begins because now you've got to do all your final stuff. You got to get all the doors in. You've got to get all the dust out of the building. You can't bring, microphones in when you've still got, sawdust layering everything. There's, weeks of cleaning, running, getting the AC or the HVAC system running and acclimating the building to it. I bet it took a week just mopping. I bet I've got at least 40 hours of mopping before I brought the first piece of equipment in.
On the equipment front, I saw something on YouTube that you did, and you mentioned in this video, you said, oh yeah, and I used to do some live stuff and brought some of that with me. Was that the church stuff you were primarily
No, when I was getting into doing the mobile recording, I ended up getting a console from a distributor who was a live production company. And he's like, well, you seem crazy enough. You want to, come help me do a show or two? And I'm like, sure. We'd go do some of the larger venues, and I stuck with it for a number of years, including, about a third of the way through the studio build. Yeah, I've done arenas, major events, done a few, the frat stuff, done major nightclubs, a lot of the festivals that he did. I'd do 6-8 bands a day.
So you had accumulated a lot of gear in that time period.
Oh, yeah. All the usual, you had to have at least, a half a dozen comps, 4 to 6 channels of gates, 8 channels of gates, 2 reverbs, and 2 delays. And that was all in your front of house rack, plus you had to have your console. And so, I started doing some of my own live sound. Then I ended up in another band. So yeah, I got to have, full PA for that. So yeah, I've still got, quite a bit of live PA gear.
Are you mostly self-taught, trial by fire of years of self-recording, church sound, live sound, all of that culminating in where you are today?
Yeah, pretty much trial by fire. I was very fortunate in that I've worked beside a lot of great national acts. I learned a lot from their engineers. I've run Monitor World and front of house and both, just the whole live thing. And it's, like I said, it's everything from 20,000 seat arenas to, 20 people in a bar.
Yeah. Let me ask you this about the studio. Is there anything that if you could go back in time and knowing what you know now and redo anything about the studio or the process, what would you do different?
Storage, just equipment storage.
Oh, storage in the studio itself.
Yeah. Okay. Storage space. I've got a Yamaha C7 Grand that I was very fortunate to pick up. But it eats up a lot of room in the studio. Yeah, it's a big grand piano. It makes it tight to, maneuver around in there sometimes. But, having a bunch of mic stands in there, gobos and all of those kind of things, mic cables, just all the logistics of what you need in a day-to-day operation, I would love to have at least twice as much storage as what I have. It'd be great to have a nice big room that was attached to the studio that I could store all my drum kits in. I have 6 drum kits. I can't fit 6 drum kits in the studio space with a grand piano and a 7-piece ska band. It's just not going to happen. I got to take stuff out. Having storage space is not a luxury. It's a necessity. And I think that most of the studio owners that I've talked to would all agree, man, if I just had another closet that I could put, all these mic stands in.
Do you think you would ever build a storage building that would attach to the studio?
If I do that, I'm adding on a big room. I'm very fortunate. I've got 5 3/4 acres. I've got room where I could put a 60 by 80 in. So if I expand and do something like that, if I'm going to be stupid, I'm going to be real stupid.
Go all in.
You got to go all in. So yeah, if I do that, I'm going to put in a big room, and I'm going to put in another control room, hopefully one identical to this. Then I'm going to put in nothing. I'm going to put a hallway that is nothing but storage. And okay, this is where we're going to put all the mic stands. This is where we're going to put all the gobos. This is where all the drums are going to go.
All the drum kits, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. And the problem with all that is that if you do that, you're going to fill it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
where's the problem there? Right?
Yeah. There's no problem.
Yeah. This has been really, really interesting to talk about a lot of these details. We haven't got into deep studio build in a while, and it's great to hear of this journey for you because there's so many lessons for everybody else. And
yeah, don't do it.
Yeah. But here's the lesson that I take away from it is take your time and plan
absolutely.
And think and revise, and don't get too stuck on one idea, and do your research. That's the lesson I take away from it, Max.
Yeah. You can't spend too much time educating yourself. Again, I'm going to go back to DIY the build. But unless you design studios, there's a lot of things that you're going to get wrong because you don't do it every day. Now, if you can take the time, if you can take, 4, 5, 6 years and learn this stuff, yeah, go for it. But consult with somebody who does do this on a daily basis.
Absolutely.
It's money well invested. When I was in the middle of my studio build, there was a fellow on one website who was like, well, I did my own design, and, I don't need an architect. I don't need a, acoustic engineer. I can do this myself. He finished up when I was still working on the slabs and stuff. And he was like, man, I've got this problem. I've finished my build and I've got all my equipment in and I'm all wired up. But, now that I'm doing some testing, I've got some weird acoustic anomalies. He said, I don't know what to do. And somebody said, well, it looks like you've got one of your walls is bridged. He was like, no. Well, come to find out, yeah, all of his walls were bridged between the interior wall and the exterior wall. And to hold them up, he, to keep them, stable and vertical and all that, he put in bridges and he forgot to take them out. So he had to unload all of his gear and rip down every bit of his construction because some of the walls he could get to from the control room and a couple of the walls that were bridged, he had to go into his tracking room to undo them. So it cost him stupid amounts of money, stupid amounts of time, stupid amounts of aggravation, and it for a simple 1x2 that was bridging walls together.
Unbelievable.
And, yeah.
Wow.
So, it's those little things. Yeah, it can be painful, so yeah, get some help.
Get some help.
Yeah.
Well, the studio is Darkpine Studios. Audience link will be in the show notes. And,
thanks, man.
And yeah, Max, thanks so much for making time for me.
I appreciate it.
This is really cool to hear.
Yeah, this has been fun. I appreciate it. it.
All right. Well, you take care.
All righty, man. Thank you, sir. Have a
See
good
ya.
one.